So again, good morning to everyone. We have 60 minutes, so I think it's time to get started. I'm very happy to be with you this morning. I'm Tormod Andresen, the Norway Perm Rep here in Geneva, and I'm glad to moderate this discussion about something very important, how we can reduce the risk posed to civilians in many theaters of conflict, posed by ordinances and the use of explosive weapons. Protection of civilians is, of course, guiding principles for my country's humanitarian policy, hence also our interest and investment in this sector. I'm very happy to welcome all of you and to welcome our panelists that come from all corners of the world to share their experiences and practices in this evolving field of how to best prepare and equip local communities for the risks and protection against the risks that we're talking about here today. Of course, we're talking about a very tangible risk that causes the deaths and injuries for thousands of people every year. The risk caused by the use of explosive weapons, but also, of course, of all kinds of ordinances left behind that you know better than I do, probably. So this is why we are here. We know that the techniques and the way we apply these trainings and education around these risks, they evolve over time. They also vary between different cultures, different geographies, and different settings, the humanitarian setting and the development setting. So we have a chance today to really take stock of the best possible practices in this regard. I understand for the people in the know, we're talking about EORE and CPP. You would know better than I do what that entails, but you know, we will learn as we go. Like I said, we have 60 minutes, so I need to be quite strict on the time, but we will listen to the panelists and then we will have, hopefully, space for you to engage within that 60 minutes. But I think the best thing I can do is to really hand over to the panel. And our first speaker is Rupert, who is with the UNDP. And that has been central in their work, including in Lao PDR, where he is currently. He has also a vast experience from Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, so a well-traveled expert in this field. I'm very happy to have you here, and over to you, Rupert, please.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think at one end of this risk education development emergency spectrum is the case of Lao. UNDP work with the National Regulatory Authority of Lao PDR, and as some of you probably know, risk education in Lao PDR has been going on for more than 20 years. There's more people being had risk education sessions than there are of the population of the country. And this really kind of prompted some questions from us regarding the utility of risk education. So really, with these very few slides, I want to share just a methodology and outcomes of the research we took into this work. The research had three objectives. One is to look at what was happening during the accident, why the accident occurred. Second was to look at trauma care provision post-accident. And third was to look at longer-term livelihood support and gaps. I want to highlight the importance of survivor voices and highlight the difference between adults and children and men, women, boys and girls, which is very particular to risk education and roles and perceptions of danger. Highlight the importance of evidence-based approaches. We've just heard a lot on evidence focus. And approaches to what is the outcome of risk education, which is social behavior change and adoption of good practice. Risk education is not the objective. Risk education is the methodology which we try to achieve social behavior change. And also the emphasizing the need to focus on measuring results over activity. So in Lao, I think many people know the situation in Laos. It's massively contaminated by cluster munitions. 17 of the 19 provinces have contamination. It's an ongoing, long-term chronic problem. We took interviews. We contracted an organization called JSI to undertake research into survivors from the past 5 years. 50 survivors of UXO accidents, and particularly put a focus on children, which is the first time this has been done, certainly in Southeast Asia, and I believe there's been a similar study in Afghanistan. But where we have 50% of casualties children, and of those, the vast majority boys, children is a serious and major concern of risk education. And to ignore children's voices and a child-focused approach is negligent, I would argue. So there was developed separate adult and children tools in the survey, and included some government survey in terms of victim assistance response. And you can see there the percentages of where those interviews took place. So pertinent to risk education in the research was, were survivors aware of UXOs prior to their accident? So the vast majority had, but a significant proportion haven't. And what they knew between children and adults, and you see some very, very marked differences between adult knowledge and awareness and children awareness. So children's awareness is, you see from the data, very, very different from adult statistics. 28% of children were aware, the vast majority were not aware of the basics of UXOs. There's our socio-demographic characteristics between the numbers. Particularly, I'd like to point out the gender difference. For children survivors, 78% interviewed were boys over girls, and certainly male. The statistics nationally and over the years also reflect that very, very heavy male bias. That's mostly due in terms of men on traditional roles of men in rural societies, which is mostly land extension and setting fires, which trigger ordnance. And secondly, for boys, what we can only term as inquisitiveness from young boys, aged particularly 8 through 14. And that presents a certain set of challenges. And educational attainment is important because Lao has been going through a process of embedding risk education into primary, lower secondary and higher secondary curricula. The emphasis has got to be on primary education, but also there is a significant amount of children, 1/3 of children who do not complete primary education. So even within the pre-existing structures, there are gaps. It is also worth noting that on Lao fluency, again, there are big gaps in Lao knowledge. The main areas of contamination in Lao are on the Vietnamese border and in the central plateau around Siang Quang, where there is a predominant prevalence of language diversity. 40% of Lao population do not speak Lao as their first language. And a significant amount of children don't complete primary school. And yet, traditionally in Lao, risk education has been in schools and been in Lao language. So there's obviously some very, very clear gaps in coverage. And then, as you see from adult setting a fire is the main problem. And this moves away from traditional do not touch messages towards better mitigation measures on how risk education measures should be addressing agricultural practice. And then with children, touching, moving UXOs to play, and what we may call foraging, which is dig around in scrub for whatever reason. So this is inquisitiveness of boys. Taking the results of this research back into the risk education sector in Laos, we're really trying to focus and use this evidence to focus on children in communities, the need for systematization of child-focused risk education in school, but importantly out of school as well. The focus needs to continue to be on formal primary education and the need to better measure results, not in terms of sessions completed, but in terms of actual safe behavior adopted. And that presents a certain set of challenges in how you measure that. Light knowledge attitude practice surveys, normally the best way of doing that, but how you identify good practice is hypothetical. The main driver of this research is linguistic issues. Lao government has a very singular approach to ethnicity and language, but is increasingly recognizing the need to be able to diversify and being able to allow operators to undertake native risk education in appropriate languages. That involves recruitment and HR of operators, recruiting Lao with indigenous languages, which represents potentially a sea shift in terms of recruitment policy for large operators. Some operators are embracing that. Halo have a very good approach towards ethnicity in where they work. Some organizations need to catch up because the majority of their employees are native Lao speakers. And the shift in adults from risk education towards risk mitigation and making sure that those messages in appropriate languages are really focusing on what the actual threat is, rather than the perception that the need is a lack of knowledge. For adults, most adults have their knowledge, yet accidents persist. Here's a QR code to the study. I think it's pretty good. I didn't write it, I commissioned it, but it's really given us some insight. And I think the main takeaway I would want to present is that our risk education efforts need to be based on evidence, and we've heard that today in the main room plenary earlier. And that we must always remember that people are the center of our programming, and if we stop and listen to our rights holders in this process, we can learn and we can make sure that our programs are relevant and deliver exactly what is needed in terms of risk mitigation. Thank you.
Super, thank you so much. That was very, very interesting, and thank you for bringing us directly to the, I think, main takeaway that, this is contextual. It is not one size fits all. It's something that needs to be custom made and that sort of cater to the age groups, the gender, the ethnicity, the everything in the actual target population. We will now hear from you, Eloise Pierry, with field experience from Afghanistan and Iraq in this area, but now in an important global role as global specialist, ensuring technical guidance, support, and so on for EORE and CPP programming. Eloise, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all of you for being here with us today. So indeed, today I will focus my presentation on conflict preparedness and protection. As mentioned by my colleague previously, risk education is a mean, and the main goal for us is behavioral change. But while essential, risk education is not always sufficient, especially in conflict settings where explosive ordnance are not the biggest threat for the communities. They have to deal with other kind of threats like explosive weapons, drones, or other types of threats that are not explosive ordnance, but that needs to be tackled by mine action operators. So what it is, CPP? So conflict preparedness and protection are basically activities that will help civilians anticipate, reduce, and respond to risks from explosive weapons and other conflict-related threats through awareness, preparedness, and protective behaviors. So it's not replacing risk education. It complements risk education with other types of messages. We are tackling other kind of threats. The main threats that we are covering with CPP are explosive weapons, drones, ground attacks, incendiary weapons as well. It is important to note that the current IMAS definition of explosive ordnance is standardized, and it's core to mine action, but it is too limited to actually reply to the needs of the community. And this is the reason behind the development of this new subsector, let's say. Just to give you an idea of the scale of the problem, in 2025 alone, ICRC reported more than 130 armed conflict worldwide, with an increasing exposure to EWIPA settings. We have an increase of 69% of civilian casualties related to explosive weapons accidents. It's massive. Now, yesterday I was attending another side event where someone presented the figures from Ukraine, showing that from 2022 until now, there has been 1,000 casualties due to explosive ordnance, while there has been more than 16,000 casualties due to explosive weapons. It is massive. So we need to tackle that. Usually risk education focuses on explosive ordnance after use, the contamination that is still here, and the post-strike risk reduction. CPP will complement it while addressing the risks during the hostilities, the immediate protective behaviors to adopt before, during, and straight after an armed attack. It will also work on preparedness measures. As I mentioned, we work also on what to do before. Anticipatory actions are the core of conflict preparedness and protection. It is usually, most of the time, if we wait for an explosive weapons incident to happen to provide CPP, it is too late. We need people to be aware of the protective behaviors to adopt prior to the incident. They need to know how to do a grab bag, how to do a safe room, how to make an evacuation plan. And this needs to be done prior to the conflict, prior to at least to the onset of the crisis, let's say. And CPP, as risk education, actually complements a lot of other humanitarian sectors. It fits obviously in protection, but also in victim assistance, in mental health, in it will complement gender-based violence activities as well, child protection, or obviously disaster risk reduction. So it's not designed to be a standalone activity. It needs to be anchored in a broader response, as it is the case for risk education as well. While some organizations like NPA are doing CPP since years now, it is quite new for the other organization. HI is working on it since a few years now, 3-4 years now, and more organizations are taking the same direction. But we need to have some evidence, some guidance, some discussions to understand to make sure that we will have common standards, common way to implement CPP as we have for risk education. Which leads me to the Saving Lives in Conflict reports that HI developed last year. And I wanted to share with you the main methodology we used for that report and the main findings that we have. You have a QR code here if you want to have access to the report. It is available in several languages. And yeah, let's dive into the main findings of the report. So first of all, this report comes from a multi-stakeholder project, so not only humanity and inclusion, but also Article 36 and insecurity insights. And there were 4 focus areas for that research. One was humanitarian access and security. The other one was access to healthcare in conflict settings, in EWIPA settings, sorry. The other one was vulnerable groups and specific needs, and finally risk education and CPP. It was a project funded by the European Union and Norway, and the main objectives were to identify the gaps in EWIPA settings that will affect the delivery of risk education and CPP, but more importantly, the idea was to identify the best practices and to propose an agenda for action. To do so, the consultants who developed the reports opted for an holistic approach, meaning that they did a literature review of more than 50 resources across academic policy, operational literature, but they also did more than 40 interviews with global specialists, national specialists, local actors, people affected, communities affected, etc. But we also did a workshop last year in Brussels, a 2 days workshop, gathering people not only from risk education and CPP sector, but also donors, also people from broader protection sector. We tried to have everyone around the table so we can think CPP and what are the best practices for CPP as a multi-sectoral thing, not staying with only main action actors. They also developed in-depth field cases for 4 countries, Lebanon, Myanmar, Ukraine, and Palestine, focusing on Gaza. And what are the main findings of the research? Well, the research points to several persistent gaps. First, risk education and CPP remained under-positioned within coordination systems and preparedness frameworks, which limits reach and impact during armed conflicts specifically. Second gap is that CPP still lacks sufficiently shared guidance, and there is not yet at least institutional anchoring of CPP. So the practice varies from one country to another, from one context to another, from one operator to another, which is obviously an issue because we can't make sure that we will provide the same messages in the same place to the people. Third, access and insecurity, of course, constraints continue to undermine the delivery. It is also the case for risk education, but definitely in EWIPA settings, it's even more important. And fourth, the evidence shows that context-specific approaches are essential. So the programming depends on tailored messaging, inclusive and disaggregated data, and adaptation to community realities. So in short, closing these gaps requires stronger coordination, shared standards, and investments in locally driven and evidence-based responses. So what are now that we have this report who gave us some ideas of the best practices and what are the gaps, what do we need to do. So the report proposed 5 practical directions. First, to develop adaptable guidance for CPP that is strong enough to create common standards, but also flexible enough to work across context and threat environments. Second, we need to invest in workforce capacity, especially for local and national actors who are closest to affected communities. Third, we need to integrate risk education and CPP across sectors and coordination systems rather than treating them as standalone activities. Fourth, we need to strengthen data and accountability, including better analysis and targeting and community feedback loops. And finally, we need to support local and survival leadership, including DGA-led and survival-led organization in CPP, so that the responses are more equitable, credible, and sustainable. So overall, the goal is to make risk education and CPP more anticipatory, more relevant, and more accountable across the emergency development spectrum. So just to finish, I would emphasize that the challenge before us is not only to acknowledge that conflict environments are changing, but to adapt our risk education approaches accordingly. We have enough evidence now to justify action. What we now need is greater institutional commitment, stronger cross-sector collaboration, and practical investment in approaches that protect civilians in real time as well as after the fact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eloise. I think you're absolutely right in pointing out that today's conflict environment with so many live conflicts, typically, in populated areas, we need to have these 2 risk alleviating sectors to come together in a coherent way. So thank you for pointing that out. We are doing okay for time, but I'm conscious that we have Colin, Marie, and Hugh still to speak. So I ask you to speed up just a little bit, and I'll do my part by being brief in describing your last background, Colin. Just to say that you are now in Sarajevo, in the Global NPA Training Center in Bosnia, but you have been in Gaza, Iraq, Turkey, Somalia, and Azerbaijan. In this area. So thank you very much for being here, Colin. Over to you.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction, and really great to be with you today to speak more about emergency risk education. Eloise did a very good job of highlighting the need for our sector to continue developing guidance, standards, and resources. So I wanted to use the opportunity of this side event to highlight some of the initiatives that are taking place at the global level, specifically under the Explosive Ordnance Risk Education Advisory Group, when it comes to developing explosive ordnance risk education in emergencies. More and more, as we all know, mine action operators are called upon to deliver risk education interventions in emergency contexts, whether that's active conflict environments or in situations where natural disasters or other kinds of humanitarian disasters complicate the operational environment. And unlike EORE in development contexts like Laos, where we have sufficient resources, maybe in time, and well-established national authorities and operators, in emergency risk education, we need to have very highly time-critical protection interventions, which are often delivered amid dynamic security risks, access restrictions, displacement, disrupted services, and rapidly changing patterns of contamination and civilian exposure to explosive ordnance and explosive weapons risks. This makes it a much more difficult task to do. And we're often having to do it when in time-constrained situations where the resources we may need in order to do it perfectly may not exist. So the emphasis is often on reaching the maximum number of beneficiaries in the most highly affected areas and with the most critical safety messaging as quickly as possible. But this is easier said than done. This is a difficult task in many environments. First of all, in an emergency situation where the clock is ticking, we have very little time to plan and prepare our risk education interventions and gather the kind of evidence that we need in order to design and implement our interventions. Often when we're talking about emergency situations, we're talking often about rapid onset emergencies. We're seeing around the world, month after month, new emergencies appearing all over the world that perhaps are very difficult to predict, and mine action operators are increasingly called upon to try to deploy and operate in these environments when maybe there's no presence or capacity on mine action in these environments. As such, if a natural disaster hits or a humanitarian disaster changes the operational environment, or a new conflict breaks out in a new context where we're not prepared already, we're obviously going to be lacking many of the safety messages and tools that we need in order to immediately conduct risk education, whether that's EORE or CPP, and we need to develop those. We need to adapt those materials and messages to target audiences, and often we're doing that with very poor data. By definition, emergency contexts are data poor contexts for the most part. Often we're unable, due to access restrictions or time, able to collect evidence on the ground that we would normally have in order to develop adapted and contextually correct safety messaging. So we need to kind of focus on improving that. Monitoring and QA, of course, in these environments is extremely challenging. We may not have access to the areas that are most in need, but we still have to have approaches and messages and activities that reach these high-need areas. So often, more and more, we're seeing mine action operators having to adapt and use remote means of management and quality assurance in their risk education activities. Of course, there's existing gaps in collaboration, in coordination. Now, with the humanitarian reset and the recession of the AORs under the protection cluster, we're perhaps going to see new challenges and new gaps when it comes to coordination and oversight. So more and more, it's up to us operators to come together in different forums and try to coordinate as key actors. And lastly, there's a lack of sector-wide tools. At the sector level, we want to be creating collaboratively the kinds of materials, tools, resources that we need so that all of us can work in this kind of sector and deliver well. And when we work together to develop these things together and make them available, you know, now more than ever, we're having to do more with less. Less funding, less staff, more because we're now trying to respond to an increasingly unstable world. So more and more, if we band together, we're able to accomplish more for the sector. This is the reason why the Explosive Ordnance Risk Education Advisory Group created the Emergency Risk Education Task Team. For those of you who don't know the EORE AG, it was established in 2019 to provide guidance to the sector and identify ways to improve the effectiveness, efficiency, and delivery of risk education programming. Given both the increasing need for emergency risk education and the challenges the sector faces in implementing it effectively, the task team was established in March 2024 with the aim to bring together technical experts from across the sector and other relevant fields who can contribute to the joint development of risk education materials, tools, resources, and to share information and share best practices across the sector between organizations to improve our collective interventions. We're proud to say that the Emergency Risk Education Task Team is quite a diverse group of organizations and members with about 17 organizations represented within our membership and about 26 sitting members participating in our meetings. And the majority of these are mine action operators, but we have tried to have a multidisciplinary approach where we bring in technical experts in adjacent fields who can help us with the development of new risk education materials and messages and tools. The reason for this is, we've structured the Emergency Risk Education Task Team around this core membership, and then also we've created 3 sub-task teams that are thematically aligned. So the first being focused on incendiary weapons, specifically about risk education when it comes to incendiary weapons and the risk that they pose. The second is conflict preparedness and protection, which Eloise just presented on. And then the third is the delivery of explosive ordnance risk education in environmental hazard situations. And all of this, the creation of the group is focused on some key objectives, which is to catalyze the emergency risk education initiatives worldwide, to compile technical resources for field practitioners, encourage interdisciplinary participation across our sectors, and help shape future work plans and strategies of the EORE advisory group. So in this time that we've been operational, we've been able to develop and roll out a number of tasks and outputs. So we've been able to map key resources, materials, and documents, and create digital libraries around these thematics that I just mentioned. We've been able to produce a number of briefing notes and presentations, bite-sized content that provide guidance and information to practitioners. And then we've been able to develop a number of tools and resources, 2 of which I've shown on the slide here. These are 2 dashboards and information management systems that we created in support of the sector. The first, tracking incendiary weapons incidents on a weekly basis, mapping those out on a global map, and also indicating where medical facilities are close to those, so that the medical researchers from Extract, an organization that is part of the group, can identify where incendiary weapons victims are being treated and gather data for onward policy research. And then we've also created a tool mapping and overlaying natural hazard risks with explosive weapons risks. It's not only about producing tangible outputs, but also sharing information, having a collaborative forum where we can come together and share information. So primarily that's within the membership, having members come together and update each other and provide some information sharing between organizations. But we also have been bringing in external experts to deliver interesting presentations that are informative for risk education programming. So that this year we've had a really great presentation from incendiary weapons expert, DRR experts, and one on the aftermath of Cyclone Ditva in Sri Lanka. Lastly, I just want to talk about one last initiative before handing it over to Marie, which is the upcoming process of drafting an IMAS technical note on explosive weapons risk education, which would seek to outline guidance on the implementation of risk education, which has a more holistic view of civilian protection and explosive weapons risks. So namely, looking at those standards, those guidelines surrounding CPP and its core safety messaging, and providing technical guidance and standards for operators in order to deliver risk education and emergencies more efficiently. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Colin, and thank you for talking about the constraints that you're under, including the funding problems. I find it all the more commendable that you take on this role to try and make sure that you really learn from each other and sort of that this whole sector is really in the business of making the other one better, a better performer. Very proud to be a supporter of NPA, and I'm looking forward to be present at the opening of your new office in Geneva. You're a bit countering the trend by opening up a new office in Geneva. Very much welcome to you. So we will now hear from Marie. You have a very impressive academic and research background in this area, but based on experiences from the field and in many different locations. So Marie, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you all for joining today this side event. So we've been talking about evidence, we've been talking about being more proactive in emergencies. And so while EORE is quite well evidenced when it comes to CPP, we are still in the early stages. There are some organizations that have been implementing CPP for quite a while now, but how do we ensure proper safety messages are properly evidenced, actually based, for instance, on blast engineering? And so today I'm speaking both on behalf of the CPP subtask team that is falling under the emergency risk education task team that was just presented by Colleen, and also on behalf of the Early Response Network for EORE and CPP, which are two initiatives working on both evidencing but also operationalizing proactive approaches. So to start with, very briefly, because Colleen just explained the work of the emergency risk education task team as a whole. Here, as part of what we're doing with the CPP subtask team, so one of the objectives is really to centralize resources, try to map what actors are doing. So what we do is that on a regular basis, we do a mapping of what humanitarian mine action actors and operators are implementing CPP. We have a mapping where we have identified more than 9 contexts where operators are implementing CPP. And it keeps growing, actually, because when we started, we had much less a year ago, so it's growing. For now, we are mainly mapping interventions by international actors. The aim is to expand and ensure that this mapping is also including national stakeholders. And while I'm doing this presentation on the work that we're doing, it's also an invitation for others to join this work that we are doing. Because we are moving forward, and I think we would really benefit from local actors to be part of the work that we are doing. But beyond the mapping of what is being done by mine action operators, we also include, we thought that it would be interesting as well, because we see a growing initiatives in European countries on CPP-like, so that we could learn as well on what is currently being done, and potentially in the future start approaching some of these countries so that we could build partnerships with them. Beyond that, so Colleen mentioned the library. We now have more than 100 materials from different contexts that are filling this library and that can be used by different actors whenever there is a need or new emergency. Now, as part of the work that we're doing, we have an objective to develop tools, to develop guidance. So, and there is as well the TNMA that is, the work is initiating as well. And so one of the first steps was to actually agree on what we're talking when we're talking about CPP, because EORE is well defined in the IMS 1210, but we thought it was important as well to define CPP, and in particular CPP risk education. And we took as a basis the definition of EORE to make sure that we are aligned for the future work of the TNMA. But just, I would like to flag one thing. Most of the members of the CPP subtask team do have a mandate that oftentimes go beyond mine action. So we understand that this definition might go beyond what will be at the end within the TNMA on explosive weapons risk education. But we felt it was important to ensure that the mandates of all the organizations participating within the subtask team was respected. as part of the work that we are doing, we're also making sure to define the scope, the topics that we want to have covered as part of CPP. So I will not go into detail in naming all the topics, but basically the idea is that you have all this information. We distributed a brief note. I'm hoping that you can get a hand on it. If not, we will try to share it more widely. So I was just mentioning the message categories, the topics that we want to have covered as part of CPP risk education. This is the foundation, but now we have to make sure that the messages that we are providing are based on evidence, on technical evidence. So, and we do have a long-term objective also to support the work that will be done in terms of standardization of CPP. And to make sure that, to achieve that, the idea would be to contribute to a cross-sectoral, technically validated guidance that could serve as an evidence-based foundation for message elaboration. And in order to do that, so we are aiming to conduct a series of technical workshops. We conducted the first one in February. We focused on some specific topics mainly related to the identification of safe rooms, for example, or how to prepare them, and the safety position. These are messages that are often provided as part of CPP, but have never been really tested with experts from different backgrounds. And so we've had experts from blast engineering, security, and trauma, medical trauma expertise. What we really wanted to do is that taking all the messages that can be provided, we wanted to identify what is confirmed by evidence, where do we need to do context and weapon adaptations, and where are we lacking evidence. And the idea, and this is just the beginning, the idea is to, and we do have an ambitious agenda, but based on the latest discussion among the members, the idea will really be to focus on safe behaviors in various scenarios, on specific threats, and particular drones, but also on trauma-informed and disability-inclusive CPP. Now, I was talking about the CPP subtask team, and now moving on to a new initiative that was launched yesterday. Thank you again for that, Eloise, during the plenary on EORE in emergencies. And so, while the CPP subtask team aimed to participate in strengthening the evidence, the Early Response Network for EORE and CPP aims to operationalize the work and support anticipation for early interventions during emergencies. So I'm going to be very brief on why there is a need to be more proactive than reactive currently, because Eloise and Colleen already set the scene for that. But I really want to explain to you what is it, how is it thought, what we want to do with this coalition. So it's very new. It was formally adopted in March this year under the EORE Advisory Group and co-founded by the JICHD, by MAG, NPA, UNICEF, Humanity and Inclusion, and UNMAS. Our main goal is really to focus on contexts where there is the higher risks of conflict, higher risks of natural events, natural hazards, but where there is also the lowest capacity, the lowest technical capacity. And by monitoring these emerging crises, we aim to establish proactively collaborations with local actors. We aim to provide to these actors evidence-based risk education support and technical support to CPP at the very onset of the crisis. I would like to clarify as well what we are not. We are not an operational or implementing actors with this initiative. We really aim to provide technical support to those who will be implementing. We are not a coordination body either, or neither we will be providing long-term support. This is really aiming to provide support at the very onset of the crisis. So how it will work? In order to be able to prepare, to anticipate for a crisis, there is quite some work that needs to be done ahead of crisis. The idea will really be to collaboratively and agree among the members, identify contexts to be monitored using defined criteria, and engage with field-level stakeholders in those contexts. We want to establish an on-call rotation for members to be able to provide this technical support to local actors in those pre-identified contexts. And the idea would also be that using the work of the risk education task team, of the CPP task team, we will also have a repository of messages, templates that could be ready to use very quickly. In addition to that, upon activation, the idea will be to be able to respond rapidly as soon as possible during the lead time. And for that, making sure that we do have emergency EORE and CPP messages that are customized, tailored to audiences, and that the distribution channels have been identified with local partners. And for that, we will be providing short-term remote technical support to in-countries actors. So what's next? Again, it's the very early stages of ERNE. We are trying to move forward as fast as possible, but we need to define now the internal processes, how we will be selecting the context that we want to monitor, the tools that we will be using, how do we activate. We also, once this is being done, we also want to start the preparedness effort with local actors that are either interested or that were identified through our selection process, but also ensure that we are doing fundraising to support this preparedness and activation effort. And so, to conclude, the CPP subtask team and ERNE are two sides of the same commitment towards protection of civilians in active conflict. We want to build the evidence that is promoting safe behaviors from explosive weapons in emergencies, but we also want to make sure it reaches people in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. And I'm struck by the amount of ground that we cover here today, from the historic contamination in Lao PDR to indeed sort of modern day conflict, the drones and the risks entailed in modern day conflict, including the prevention that you spoke about, Marie. So my compliments to all the panelists so far. It's really been interesting, and we're doing okay for time. It's now 6 minutes left, but last but not least, we'll hear from you, Hugh, of UNICEF. You're leading UNICEF's works in this area. We started out by Rupert talking about the boys in Lao PDR, so looking forward to hear UNICEF's take on this. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And yes, in the next few minutes, 6 minutes or so, we'll talk about the humanitarian reset. And we'll have a dialogue on that. I have to clarify that I will use my UNICEF hat, as Ambassador said, not the EORE advisory group hat that I have, together with Mark Wilkinson from DCA, who is co-chairing this group, because we didn't have yet a dialogue on this topic, an in-depth discussion and debate on this topic as a coalition. Of course, every organization is engaged on those discussions, but not necessarily as a coalition. So I think for us, for the ERA Advisor Group and our strong secretary, the GICHD, we need to put that on the agenda, that we need these discussions. So the idea of this next 5 or 6 minutes is really to kick off this dialogue on the humanitarian reset and what it means for CPP, for EORE, and for the group itself. I won't dive into the details of this slide, but you see the complexity of this process, and also, just by way of background, of course, there are many profound shifts that are underway, and that are challenging our ways of working, and it includes funding cuts, unprecedented funding cuts, more crisis than ever, as it was pointed out by Eloise, and also erosion of support to IHL that is also impacting us, the entire sector, but also the EORE subsector. So these humanitarian reset should be seen as a rare and very urgent opportunity to reshape a system that is not anymore fit for purpose in this new landscape where we evolve. So let's look at the vision of this reset. And the idea for the next minutes is just to look at some key pointers on what this reset means for us and the principle of this reset as well. So as you know, it's very much about decentralization, being more inclusive, being more collaborative, being more people-centered. In terms of localization, so that's about decentralization, that's a very important aspect of the reset, with the idea that the first line of response is the country itself and local authorities. So we should invest more on strengthening them and supporting those systems that are in place for both preparedness and response. The second line of response should be at regional or sub-regional level, and we need to empower, we need to work with those regional structures that are so essential, including for our sector. Another key angle that is part of the vision for this reset is about prioritization or hyper prioritization. This is extremely relevant to our sector. We need to do, and when I say our sector, not only mine action, but specifically EORE and CPP, we need to have stronger priority setting mechanisms. We need to work on that prioritization at global level, but also at national level and even at local level to make sure we reach those who are most at risk. Another great concept behind this reset is about global solidarity, to rethink the way we should improve our solidarity. The EORE Advisory Group is an example of that solidarity. We have a coalition, as it was said by several speakers. I should thank Norway as well, because this coalition was also created thanks to the impetus, thanks to the support of Norway back in 2019. You really wanted this coalition to take shape, and it happened. And now it works well, and even in the Secretary General report, it was said that it could be an example for the victim assistance pillar, because such coalition would be needed for other pillars. So it's even seen as a model. That said, we need to improve and rethink the way we collaborate. For example, when we talk about global solidarity, what about the private sector? Should we engage them in the EORE Advisory Group? What about the public at large? We already have member states that are part of the group, but maybe we should go beyond. We have 2 so far. So we need to think about that as well. Finally, another aspect of this vision is about greater transparency and accountability. And here we can give a very good example about IMAS 510 and all the effort of SBD2, Standard Beneficiary Definition 2, version 2, that was led by NGOs and that influenced the IMAS structure. So now we have made tremendous progress in better reporting, counting beneficiaries, and that applies also for CPP. But what about the outcome level? What about demonstrating tangible improvement in people's life? So that's an expectation of the reset as well. We should go beyond that. So that's another line of thought that we should take into account. As you know, the ERC, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, he launched the reset back in March 2025, and he has 4 pillars. So he established 4 pillars, and I will go briefly through those 4 pillars. First one is about defining. This is very much about prioritization, including at global level. And to better prioritize, we need to invest in data collection systems. We need to be more evidence-based. We need stronger injury surveillance. ERNE, an important aspect of ERNE that you just introduced, is about making sure that every affected state has stronger evidence on the impact of those weapons on their communities. That will help prioritization. So we need to invest on evidence building, otherwise we won't be able to prioritize. And we need also to engage national and local authorities to take more responsibilities on this topic. With all those funding cuts, we need to find innovative ways and make sure they have more ownership and are more engaged on the humanitarian front. And we need to work with the development partners. I will come to this in a minute. Next slide, thank you. On deliver. So we need to deliver as well. That's the second pillar, the reform pillar. We need to timely and streamline response. Balancing coverage, equity, and quality. This is crucial for EORE and CPP. Coverage is about the reach. Equity is about making sure we reach the most vulnerable, those who are hard to reach. And quality is about making sure it's not only about knowledge change, it's also about behavior change. It's also about SBC, social and behavior change. So balancing these three key components is quite tricky, but it's needed. It could not be one to the expense of the other. We need to institutionalize AAP, accountability to affected population, to have more feedback from communities, to get more feedback from them, and to take into consideration their feedback. This is done through field testing, for example, but we should go beyond that. You have been talking about preparedness. Anticipatory action is key. Some organizations in this room, they have an anticipatory action strategy for all their work. We need to think about this type of strategy or framework that we use in our own sector. Here, quoting the Secretary General, says, anticipatory action saves more lives, protects more rights, and uses far fewer resources compared to late response. I think other speakers made a strong point on that. We need to revise the humanitarian development nexus and engage with other global actors, IFIs, for example. And finally, and that's a key topic that we discuss a lot already, it's about the simplification of the cluster system. This is still ongoing and starting to be implemented in the field. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then, that's the second last slide. We need, the third pillar is about devolving. It's really about decentralization. Humanitarian country team, humanitarian coordinators should be empowered. And
I'm afraid we're running a bit late, so I'll ask you to come to a closer, not long.
Yes, I will speed up on that. So we need to, thank you. We need to increase financing through pool funding mechanism, CERF, for example, and many others that are more led by a country level rather than the global level, being as local as possible and as international as necessary. Prioritization was already addressed, but we also need to invest in civil society capacity. And then final slide is about defending, and that's very crucial for our sector, especially CPP and EORE. It's about why those devices, those weapons are impacting the enjoyment of all human rights, and include EORE is a right, is a human right, and we need to defend that as well. So we need to defend those principles from a human rights perspective and document those grave violations that are affecting people, including children, And finally, we need to amplify the message that we have in the CMREP action plan, for example, about risk education. CMREP action plan is linked to the Mine Ban Treaty, so we need to use those instruments to leverage the importance of EORE and increasingly CPP. For that one, for CPP, it will be the EWIPA political declaration. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugen. The bad news is that we are running over time. The good news is that I'm going away deeply impressed by everything that we have heard, and against the difficult backdrop, the level of cooperation and partnership and resources that are available. And for all of you in the audience engaged in this important work, I assume that you can talk to these people and plug into all the wisdom and resources that they offer. I'm afraid we don't have time for Q&A, isn't that so? I mean, we have to wrap up. But I'm sure that the panelists will be available for one-on-ones after. So again, to the panelists, to everyone in the audience, thank you so much for coming and taking part in this very calorie-rich and interesting exchange. Thank you so much.